We're continuing in a series of messages around, what are we talking about? We're continuing a series of messages around cultivating hunger for God. And last week was such a beautiful moment for us. We began these conversations talking about feasting as we come to the table of communion. I loved every second of it. Today, we're going to begin a conversation around feasting in prayer. And my mind almost always goes to Jesus in the wilderness before he starts his public ministry, 3 years where he's heading toward the cross. And how many of you know when he's in the wilderness for those 40 days, he's not primarily working on sermon prep. You know, he's not working through the resumes of the potential disciples. No, these 40 days as he's prepping for a critical, eternal moment in history, he's fasting and praying. And the reason is he knows so much is at stake. And then scripture tells us at the end of the 40 days of fasting and prayer, it just says, and he was hungry physically. But Jesus then sort of juxtaposes this idea in Matthew 4:4, where he says, man does not live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. So there's this kind of word picture that he gives us that he basically is like, we're like little birds. And God the Father is feeding us directly from his mouth to our mouth. I was thinking about this. I was talking to Ashley Martin last week. Ashley, she's a good friend of ours, and she helps lead worship around here. And I was asking her after church last weekend, I just said, how do you prepare your heart? How do you get in the right mind space when you're about to lead worship? And she said two things. She said, well, one, I have to just come in already satisfied with the Lord. Like I have to be already anchored into the deep places with Jesus, because otherwise I'm not going to have courage to block out all the distractions, which is you guys. And then she said something else, and I love this. She said, and I almost always have to get in a physical posture of worship to experience spiritual worship. And I thought, that's so true. I mean, like, this is true in every area of our life, right? Don't you and I posture our lives physically for us to experience other things? I mean, like, when you're going to eat lunch today, what are you going to do? You're first going to posture your body to prepare yourself for what you're about to receive. You're going to sit down at a table, it's just posturing. You're going to put a napkin in your lap. You're going to put a knife and a fork in your hand. And what you're doing is you're aiming physically, and there's this anticipation that you're about to receive something that you did not prepare on your own. This is what God's after. This is what he wants to stir up in our lives. This is what we're going to see in Ephesians 3, by the way. If you got a copy of the scripture, I'd love for you to turn there. Paul is going to pray this prayer over the church at Ephesus, over his people. And I want to warn you here, because this is a prayer that is really outside the scope of what we tend to pray. Meaning, Paul is not going to pray that he's getting out of prison, because hello, he's in prison when he's praying this. He's not praying for his family. He's not praying for his kids. He's not praying for health. He's not praying for wealth. He's not praying for safety. He's praying the single-minded God-word prayer. Now, let me put a little asterisk here and just remind you, it is totally appropriate. It's even holy to pray for your circumstances, to pray for your kids, to pray for safety, to pray for the destiny of your life. It's totally reasonable and biblical and spirit-filled to do that. But ultimately, where we want to live, where we want to grow most comfortable, is learning to be in the secret place, learning to pray in the deep places. We want to tether our lives to where the icebergs live, meaning we do not want to pray prayers that are primarily informed by what everyone else sees. We want to find our prayers. We want to find a place of intimacy based on what God's doing. We want to find ourselves most comfortable in his presence. And this is what Paul's after, and what I'm after, and what God's doing in our house. But this is where we pick up. Verse 14, chapter 3, verse 14. Paul prays this. He says, for this reason, I bow my knees before the Father. So do you notice the physical posturing as he's about to aim his spirit, aim his heart, aim his mind towards the Father? He says, I bow my knees before the Father. He's like, I'm getting in a physical posture. from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory, he may grant you. Now, let me stop, because Paul is praying this prayer, like this unction, this confidence for his people, okay? And so Paul had people, just like you got people, right? You're like, those are my people. This is his people. I know that because he spent 3 years in Ephesus with them, longer than anybody else. And in fact, when you read in the book of Acts, his stay in the book of Ephesus, when he was leaving, when he's about to get on a ship to be on mission, everybody is weeping and they're just like begging him to stay. And yet he prays this kind of prayer that feels foreign to many of us. And the reason is he's praying, what he says is out of the riches of the glory of God. Now listen, Amy and I, we've known some rich people before. Several years ago, we spent a week alongside of one of the richest families in America. They own, it's the largest privately owned steel company in the world. They're billionaires, right? I mean, you know, there's like rich and then there's like private jet rich. They're the latter, right? His watch was worth more than my car like 10 times over, right? And here's my point. Paul is not praying out of a spiritual deficit. He's not thinking there is a kind of poverty in which he's having to reckon with. He's not going, God, you know, whatever you'll give me, whatever is available. He's like, God, I already know because of the work of Jesus on the cross and his resurrection, I'm operating with a full bank account. The riches of his glory. Let me say this a different way. The reason you and I can pray with confidence, and the reason, honestly, we're in a season where God's stirring up a heart of prayer of our house. If you haven't noticed that, God's doing that. Many of you, God's going to put a spirit of prayer on your life. It's going to turn your life upside down, but you're going to find the deepest level of satisfaction. But the reason that you and I can be the kind of people that pray with an unction, pray with a kind of contending, is because we're rooted in the confidence of the riches of the glory of God available to us. Let me say it this way. If there was a multi-millionaire that started coming to our church, and if you are a multi-millionaire, let me know. I would love to share our vision with you. But listen, if a multi-millionaire comes to our church, that doesn't do anything for me. That does not impress me. Like if a millionaire just like sits on the back row, you know, just as a spectator, that doesn't impress me. That doesn't motivate me. That doesn't give me any confidence. But the moment that millionaire opens up his checkbook, catches the vision of the gospel and the power of God for our city, and strokes a check for $1 million, all of a sudden, there's a confidence level that rises up in me. I go, man, there is something available. There are resources now at my fingertips for the purposes of God in our city. Do you see the difference? This is what Paul is praying. He says that according to the riches of the glory, he may grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being. So 2 questions that I want us to hold on to just for a moment. First question is, what does it mean to be strengthened with power? And the second question, what does it mean to be strengthened with power in the inner man? That's the language he uses. First question, what does it mean to be strengthened with power? Now, I take that to mean that you and I intrinsically do not have power. You and I, on our own, we are weak. You and I do not have enough power to do this, to do life. You don't have enough strength to navigate marriage. Marriage is hard. You don't have enough wisdom to navigate the complexities of life and death and relationships. You don't have enough wisdom to raise godly gospel children. We don't have enough. We operate, apart from Jesus, we operate at a deficit, every one of us. And so this is why he's like constantly inviting us. There's more available to you. You and I have not exceeded the possibilities of God over our life. Second question is this, is what does it mean then to be strengthened in the inner man. The language he used in the NIV is the inner being. So the goal of God, or at least part of the goal of God, part of the goal of Scripture, is part of the goal of the Spirit of God at work in your life. And whether you know that or not, the Spirit of God is at work in your life today. But part of the goal of all of that is that you would be strengthened in the inner man. Now, the problem, if we be honest, is that the majority of us, we spend the majority of our time and our energy strengthening the outer man. Hello? I mean, and just for clarity, I think it's okay to put a little lipstick on the outer man, okay? Get the CrossFit on, eat the broccoli, that's fine. I mean, even Paul says in 1 Timothy 4:8, physical training is of some value. But listen, many of you, me included, we spend the bulk of our energy on this life strengthening what other people see. Let's use the gym as the example. Many of you, hours and hours and hours and hours a week going to the gym, and more power to you. And you're like really strong and you can lift heavy things, but you're weak in the inner man. Like you're not strong enough to lift a single burden off of another person. That's what you're made for. I mean, you might be really strong and you look good in a tank top, but you're so weak and frail, you can't go to war when it counts. And I mean in the unseen places. Let me say it this way. If I haven't hurt your feelings yet, let me hurt your feelings here. Many of you are convinced, because the world has convinced you, that the most important thing you can do is what you'll do in the places that everybody else sees. This is why you spend so much time on Instagram. That's why, by the way. We're convinced that the most important things we're going to do is to virtue signal, to build some kind of kingdom, and yet Jesus comes and he's like, I'm not interested in you building your kingdom. And so what happens is when we join the kingdom, when we become sons and daughters of God through the work of Jesus, all of a sudden, we get in relationship with the God of the universe, and we begin to recognize the most important things we can do in this life are not in the places that are seen, but are in the places that are unseen. Because it's in the unseen places, the place where Jesus calls the secret place, where we find ourselves most comfortable, most satisfied with him. It's in those places that we're built up in the inner man. Let me just say this in a different way. There's going to be a small way that you're going to be built up in the inner man here, in corporate gatherings, a small way. But it's more like a vitamin. I mean, how many of you know if all you do is take a multivitamin once a week, you're still going to die? You're going to be malnourished. But when you and I, this is what Amy was talking about in the communion moment, when you and I learn to feast on Jesus in the unseen places where we're like, he's it. He's all that I want. He's all that I'm made for. All of a sudden we realize all the energy, all the angst and the anxiety that we put to the outward places, it's a fool's errand. And it's, of course, what people know when they're on their deathbed. It's a moment of clarity. You're like, why did I waste so much time worrying what other people thought? Why didn't I spend more time chasing after God? Paul understood this in a different place, 2 Corinthians 4. This is my second favorite chapter in the Bible. He says this, verse 16. He says, so we do not lose heart. One of the evidences that you are weak in the inner man is that you're constantly losing heart. And this is not to say like life circumstances, beat us down and we find ourselves at a low from time to time. But if you find yourself in persistent anxiety and you are crushed by the circumstances of your life and the rejection of other people, it's simply because you are weak in the inner man. But friends, you don't have to be. So he says, we do not lose heart, though our outer self is wasting away. Now, right now I'm 51. I'm shrinking. I've lost all my hair. I got hair growing up in other places. My eyesight is getting worse. My hearing is getting worse. My feet hurt all the time. My memory is... It's a memory joke. Listen, we're all wasting away. Whether you know it or not, incrementally, we are decreasing, which we should be. It's a shadow of what John said in John 3:30. For you must increase, I must decrease. And so we're wasting away. But Paul says this, and this is the beauty. He says, but our inner self is being renewed. This is the same exact language from Ephesians 3. He says, our inner self, our inner man's being renewed day by day. For this light and momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. So friends, listen, where God does his best work in your life is in the unseen places. It's always in the unseen place. Let me say this a different way. Clearly, you and I are going to set our eyes on the things that are seen. That's what physical eyes are for. But you and I have got to learn, this is why we want to do this together. You and I have got to learn to set our best energy in the unseen places. This is why we're constantly calling you to prayer. This is why we're like, come on Saturday mornings. We're asking for a wave of the Holy Spirit. We're asking for a heart of revival to come over our families, over our cities. We want our children to be set free from every lie, and we want to be set free to be a people of destiny in our city. But that only happens when you and I get comfortable in the unseen places. And this just means that, listen, this is not legalism. I'm trying to release you to what you're made for. This just means like we gotta get comfortable learning to say no to good things so that we can choose the best things. So he goes on, he says this in verse 17, because he's asking the question, he's knowing you're gonna ask the question, why? Why would I give myself to unseen places? Nobody's gonna see it. Nobody's gonna validate me. Nobody's gonna affirm me. Why would I give my best energy to the unseen place? He's like, here's why. So that Christ may dwell in your heart through faith. You being rooted and grounded in love. I just know many of us, we're coming in, we don't feel grounded. We feel like the foundation of our life is being shaken. I mean, it's hard to be alive. It's hard to walk through life. But this is why I'm so encouraged when I go back to 2 Kings 23, one of my favorite passages of late. It's about a guy named King Josiah, and we talked about him a few weeks ago. But King Josiah, he was 8 years old when he became king. And what's amazing is that the moniker over his life is 2 Kings 23:25. It says, before him there was no king like him who turned to the Lord with all of his heart and soul and mind and strength. And there was no one like him after him. Which is pretty amazing because he had no spiritual heritage. His dad was wicked. His granddad was even more wicked, a guy named Manasseh. And God just wakes up his heart to the things of God. And then there's this little verse. It's so crazy, this little verse. It says, and it's a throwaway. It feels like a throwaway. And it says, and Josiah began to call on the God of his father David. At which you go, wait, why was he calling on David? Like, I didn't even know David was his dad. And if you read a little bit, you realize King David was not his dad. He had a different dad. He had a different granddad. Why was Josiah, this guy who honestly was so captivated by the Lord that a wind of revival swept through Israel like nobody else? I mean, like so much so, he reinstituted worship in the temple. It had stopped. They haven't celebrated the Passover for 400 years. He tore down all the high places. And then it says, and he called on the God of his father David. Why did he call him his father? That was my question. And here's my guess. Here's how I read that. I think Josiah realized he did not have a spiritual heritage. And do you know what he did in faith? Is he inserted himself into the heritage of one of his heroes. And so he's like, I'm praying to the God of King David. I want all the blessing, and I want all the power, and I want all the influence that David had over his life, and I want you to insert it into my life. Here's why. When I'm praying, if you hear me pray in quiet moments, unsurprisingly, I begin praying things like, this might be offensive to you, but I pray to the God of Jonathan Edwards. I pray to the God of Amy Carmichael. I pray to the God of Duncan Campbell, because I'm like, God, all the things that you did in them, the revival spirit, the faith, the expectation, the hope, and a change that you brought to those nations, Lord, I want that for my life, and I want that as a legacy for my children. And so I'm just telling you, if today you're looking back on your own life and you realize you don't have a spiritual heritage, you don't have a mom or a dad or an aunt or an uncle that poured the life of the gospel into your life, legacy can start today for you. You can insert yourself into a hero of the faith and say, all that they were, I want that for my life. Let's turn the corner. He says this as he's praying. He says, and I'm praying that you would have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and the length and the height and the depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with the fullness of God. At which, I want you to just to take notice the language here. He's like, I want you to comprehend. That's his prayer. I want you to comprehend. I want you to know. And what does he want them to comprehend? What does he want them to know? He's like, the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. At which you should be asking, how do you know something that is unknowable? How do you comprehend something that is beyond comprehension? And the short answer is this, is that you know something, you comprehend something when you're made for it. It just gets dropped in you. It's a different prayer that Paul prays in Ephesians 1, where he says, and this again, and if you're memorizing scripture, I hope that you are, I would encourage you to, years ago, there were six or seven prayers that Paul prays in the New Testament. Years ago, I just committed during that year to memorize all 7 of those prayers. Because I just knew there's going to be places in my life, seasons in my life where I'm like, I don't know what to pray, but you know what I can do? I can insert myself into the faith of Paul, and I can begin to pray things that change things. And so Paul in Ephesians 1, he prays something else. He's like, I pray that you would have a spirit of wisdom and revelation. Do you know what revelation is? Revelation is when God just drops something in you. You don't even know it until you know it. That's what he's doing for you. That's what he's doing for me today. And so he says, I want you to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. This is what the psalmist understood, Psalm 42. It says, as a deer pants for streams of water. How many of you know a deer is not a thinking animal? I mean, they're beautiful and they're delicious, but they are not a thinking animal. But as a deer pants for streams of water, he says, so my soul, it's an intrinsic belief. It's something that he knows. So my soul pants for you. My soul thirsts for God. Do you know what he's saying? He's like, we're made for God. All of us were made for God. And if you're made for God, what you discover is that if you're made for him, then you're only going to be satisfied by him. Let me say this differently. When you and I get in real relationship with Jesus, and I use that modifier on purpose, real relationship. I don't mean you prayed a prayer when you're 9 and you're just like living your life any way you want to live. I mean like when we're like, Jesus, you're king. You get to call the shots. I'm bending my life to your will. I want to be a person that comes alive and burns in this generation. When Jesus becomes king over our life, which by the way is just normative discipleship. Some of you that look at like radical Christianity, I'm like, that's just normative Christianity. But when we begin a relationship with Jesus, you know what happens? When we get comfortable growing in the secret place with him, you know what happens? Over time, is that he replaces our natural appetites with spiritual appetites. I was talking to one of the guys that I disciple, and he's like, man, it's so crazy. The last month or so, he's like, I love Netflix. And he's like, I love, just like killing time, recharging, just talk, I need to just kind of kill time at home. And so I'm going to turn on some Netflix. And he's like, man, I have found myself so dissatisfied now just watching TV. He's like, it's not sinful. He's like, but I just found myself like God has replaced that appetite. And I want to be with him. That's what God's doing. Let me tell you what this looks like, and then we're going to do some ministry together. Let me tell you what the invitation is, and this is so important because what I don't want you to misunderstand today is that this is not a call to come to a prayer meeting. I mean, yes, I want you to come to prayer. I'm praying that 100 people would regularly start coming to our Saturday prayer. That's my prayer. I want you to know that because that's what I'm praying. Right now we have about 25 people come on Saturdays, and it's beautiful and there's power. But I'm praying that God would captivate your heart to cry out to him. But let me tell you what the message today is. It's not like join the church. Come and be part of our church. And like, yes, we want you to be part of Hope City. We believe God's doing something here. But the call is not to be part of Hope City. That's not really my heart. The call isn't going, hey, come, and while I know you're super busy, but if you're not so busy, maybe just join a group. And if we're lucky, you'll let us be your chaplain as you single-mindedly pursue Project Self. And we're going to be over here. We just want you to know, we're going to be over here cheering you on as you chase after the American dream, but we'll be here. Let me just tell you, this is why you have no fruit in your life. Because you've answered the wrong call. The call from Jesus over your life, over my life, is to come and die and then to come and burn. And so if you find yourself desperately unhappy today, that part of your life of discontentment, chasing after other people's approval, constantly wondering, do people like me? Are they angry? Constantly worried about the opinions of others, constantly chasing after a greater ambition. When you come and you lay that down, you say, Jesus, that part of me has got to die. Here's what happens. Here's the beauty. The part of you that longs to come alive comes alive. Your desires, your ambition, a destiny for things beyond you, they come alive. Not because you made them come alive, but because you made room. That's the call over your life. And I recognize this. I'll just say this as an asterisk. Our church is not for everybody. Jesus is for everybody, but I recognize our church is not for everybody. And so for some of you, you're like, this is not for me. God bless you. There are 150 other churches in our city. We want you to come alive to the destiny of your life. We want you to plant a flag. But spectator Christianity is like no Christianity at all.